Back around break time, I gave you some free response questions to look at, and because we got caught up in trying to get through some of the more complex topics like recursion and inheritance, we hadn't quite gotten back to them. But now that we are through with all of the topics, you've had plenty of practice writing your own code. Now we're going to come back and look at the free response questions. Remember that you have approximately 25 minutes if you expect to spend the same amount of time on each question. In the free response section, because there are four, you would spend about 25 minutes per question. Now you might find that some are easier and don't take the full 25 minutes, and you can use that time on some of the more complex ones that might take a little bit more than 25 minutes for you to solve. My suggestion is that you scan through the four free response questions, and I would start with the easiest ones, and that may not be the first one, may not be the easiest. The second one might be the easiest, so do the second one first as quickly as you can, then come back and try to work on the others. I also suggest that you read each question at least twice. I would scan it one time very quickly to kind of get the idea of what it's asking for. Then I would go back, take my time, read it a little bit more slowly as I'm starting to formulate my answer and work on the solution to the problem. So in the two free response problems that you have seen, the first one talks about taking an image that is divided up into pixels, and the pixels have numeric integer values going from 0 to 255, which really represents the pixel values going from black through gray to white, with black being a pixel or numeric value of 0 and white being represented by the number 255. So the idea is you have a picture that has been divided into a grid, a two-dimensional array of some size, and the values in each cell of the two-dimensional array will range from 0 to 255 depending on whether that pixel or that cell of the picture is white, gray, or black, or some shade in between white and black. And if you've done any work with websites and colors, you know there are color codes from 0 to 255 and so on. So what they're getting at here with this question is that you're basically going to have to prove that you can work with a two-dimensional array of integer values. So whether you understand or you even care about the whole details of the fact that it's a picture and they've divided it into a two-dimensional array with one pixel value being in each cell and they go from 0 to 255, that understanding all of that will help you, of course, with the problem, but the reality is you don't have to get bogged down in all those details. What you're looking for is, okay, off the top of my head, I should realize they're going to ask me to process through a 2D array, which means I'm going to have to use two nested for loops. No matter what they're asking me to do, I'm going to have to use nested for loops. You also should be thinking about how can I figure out the size of the array, because they're not going to give you a hard-coded value. They're not going to tell you you're always working with a 4 by 5 array. They're telling you it's two-dimensional, but it could be 3 by 5, 5 by 5, 6 by 7. It can be any dimension, any number of rows and columns. So how are you going to figure out the row and column values so that you can loop through the array without going out of bounds and generating an index out of bounds error? So you have to reach back into memory and remember that you use dot length. Array name dot length will give you the number of rows, and array name bracket 0 bracket dot length will give you the number of columns. So you've got to commit that to memory so that you can use that with your for loops. So just even doing a quick scan of this without getting bogged down in all the background information they're giving you about colors and pixels, you should be thinking two-dimensional array, length, and all of that. That's how I'm going to process through the array. Whatever they're going to ask me to do, I'm going to need to do that. Then they give you a sample class called GreyImage, and they're showing you here you have these all capital letter names here, black and white, black being 0, white being 255, and the second you see all caps, it should really clue you in these are constants. These are not changeable. These are constants they're setting up. And of course you see public static final, which again, those are the keywords you see for constants. So now I'm probably not going to want to use the value 0 and 255 in my code. I'm going to want to use black and white. They're giving me those constants for a reason. So that should sort of clue you in there. They're telling you the two-dimensional representation of the image is guaranteed not to be null, meaning you will have valid integer values from 0 to 255 in each cell, so you don't have to worry about nulls. And they're telling you again the numbers will be from 0 to 255 inclusive, so you don't have to worry about any tricky stuff there. The other thing, and when I talked in some of the lectures in the past about two-dimensional arrays on the AP exam, they will not be ragged, meaning you won't have row 1 with 5 columns and row 2 with 2 columns. If row 1 has 5 columns, row 2, row 3, every row in the array will have the same number of columns. Okay, so you don't have to worry about any irregularities there. Here they're showing you you've got an instance variable, private int bracket bracket is a 2D array named pixel values. So you need to make sure you pay attention to the names that they're using because they don't want you making up your own names. You've got to use theirs in the code. Now here we've got the setup for the count white pixels method, which we're going to implement in part A of the question. Notice it is going to return an int. So make sure when you write the code that somewhere in there you are returning an int. Okay? Make sure that you pay attention to the return types. Now another method in here is process image. Oh, also notice this does not take any arguments, okay? And it's going to return an int. Notice here they're giving us the outline, the header for the next method we're going to implement called process image. Notice it's a void, and again, it does not take any arguments. And we're going to implement that in part B of the question, the details of which are going to be below. Now here they're telling you, and this is kind of important, they're telling you you're going to process the image in row major order. Row major order means that you go row by row, so you go row 1 or row 0, column 0, row 0, column 1, you go through the first row from left to right. Then you go through the second row from left to right. Now that means your nested for loops, you're going to do the rows first and then the columns. That's the easiest way to walk an array. So they want you to process it going in that order, and they want you to decrease the value of each pixel by the value that's at pixel at row plus 2, column plus 2, if it exists. So now here we've got to be very careful we don't cause an index out of bounds array with this tricky little logic here. If the value would be a negative number or a number less than 0, remember black is our 0 value, if that subtraction results in a number less than 0, we're going to set the original location in the array to black or 0. Trying to get back to the description here. So we're going to go to row 0, column 0, which is 255, and then we're going to go to row plus 2, so 0 plus 2 is 2, and column plus 2, 0 plus 2 is 2. So we're going to go to row 2, column 2, we're going to grab that value, which happens to be 0. We're going to subtract that from the first value because we're going in row major order. We're going to subtract that from 255. 255 minus 0 is 255, so we will leave 255 in the array as it is. Next we're going to go row 0, column 1. So now row plus 2 is row 2. Column plus 2 is 1 plus 2 or 3. Again, it's a 0. We'll leave the 184 alone. And we're going to do that until we eventually get to the point where In this case, let's see, we've got row 0, column 2. So now we're going to go to row plus 2 and column plus 2. So that's this row and this column. That's a 78. Now we're going to take 178 and subtract 78 from it, which will leave us with a value of 100. That is not less than 0, so we will replace 178 with 100. Now here we're at row 0, column 3, so row plus 2 would still put us here. Column plus 2, 3 plus 2 is 5. That is out of bounds. There is no column with a numeric index value of 5, so we will leave 84 alone. We will leave 129 alone. Now we'll come to the next row and we'll continue on. And if we ever get to a situation where the number here minus the number in row plus 2, column plus 2, if that becomes less than 0, we will set the value to 0. And so here they're showing you, here's an array of values. Here is what each value will be after we go through this process of going out, plus 2 on the row, plus 2 on the column, doing the subtraction. If we end up with a negative number, we put a 0 in there. So 84 is a case where you would go 1 plus 2 is 3, 0 plus 2 is 2. We would take 84 minus 255. That would give us a negative value, less than 0, meaning it's less than black in effect. And we're going to replace 84 with a 0. Okay? So the first question that they want us to do is they want us to write a count white pixels method that goes through the array row by row and counts the number of cells that have a value of white being 255, and we return the count. In this case, there are 5 values in the array with a numeric value of 255, so our answer would be 5 in that case. Then in part B, they want us to implement that whole process image thing where we potentially are changing the pixel values that I just walked you through. So they're giving you information from the beginning of the question, so you don't have to keep going back and forth on the pages. The name of the class is GreyImage. We've got 2 constants. We've got the instance variable pixel values, which is a 2D integer array. We have the 2 methods we're going to implement, one of which returns an int, one of which returns nothing. Neither of them take values. Nothing is passed in. And they ask you to implement your solution, and they're reminding you of the pre and post conditions here. The easiest part of this is really just to walk a 2D array, have an if statement that says if the value in the current cell is equal to white, add 1 to a counter that I'm going to create. I'm just trying to get back to the other one here. So we're going to just have a counter, and we're going to count all the values that are equal to 255. All right, so I'm running out of time in this recording. I will pick up in another recording, but this first part should be very easy because you've done things like this many times. I'm setting up a counter. I happen to call it num. Here is my first for loop where I'm setting up my rows so I can walk the row. Then within each row I'm going to walk the columns. Notice I don't know the length of the array, so I'm using length here and pixel value sub 0.length here to get the total of the number of rows and number of columns. And I've got a little typo here. This should be col plus plus. And we'll pick up with this in the next recording.